The silence of death hurt his ears. The floors of the ancient library were bathed in blood. Bodies adorned the hallways, torn apart, mangled as if grabbed by some feral creature. The anger was palpable. In every last claw mark and cut, Lul could feel the rage. While Italo was efficient, their deaths were not. Their last moments were ones of agony. Their blood had drained as they looked upon him, the god of shadows. Lul pressed his hand to the archway. The fetid flesh made it difficult to stand. While not unfamiliar with a corpse, the quantity was difficult to handle. The smell was an assault on the senses, immortal bodies rotting away with the same dignity afforded to rats. As he stepped forward, he was met with an echo, but as he stilled, the sounds continued forward. The library's sole survivor stepped into view. He was stooped over, leaning his weight on a gnarled cane. He kept his distance, heavy gray eyebrows furrowing as he adjusted his glasses. Lul had seen his face 1,000 times before. The god of time, Viren, their greatest foe, a weak old man. "What brings you back?" the god asked, a voice like rustles of dry paper. Lul watched the tableau silently, the stillness of death at their feet. Finding words to fit the scene was impossible. He returned his gaze to the god, waiting for him to accept his silence as an answer. "There has to be a reason," Viren pressed. "To admire Italo's work? To bask in the accomplishment of you and your kin?" Lul shook his head. There was tension through his body, grasping and knotting from within. "Lenora, he killed her." "I see," the god regarded quietly. "What do I do without her?" "That is a question, isn't it?" Viren stepped forward. He moved with the ancient grace of time. Across the dried blood, through the maze of his fallen friends, he spoke to the halls. "What do we do without?" Three centuries later. Chapter 1. Juliet's adult life was one long, awkward date. The suitor du jour was Don Danes, a desperate choice on her mother's part. Not even a month ago, she could recall her mother eviscerating the man's character, traipsing about town in that audacious burgundy suit, a rum runner no doubt. But now it was all good family, great hair, merging assets, blah blah blah. They were 2 plates into a 5-course experience. Don was yet to discuss anything other than himself. Every word from his mouth was about college, as if Juliet hadn't attended the same institution. The least he could do was talk about his current affairs, possibly hint at a murder or something. Anything. She nodded along a spell longer as the waiter took off with her plate. It was looking like the worst-case scenario. Many men would give up if she said nothing on a date, but others just needed something pretty to bounce their voice off of. Her eyeline trailed from her table to the next. The clientele of this particular restaurant typically skewed older, but a premier across the street was drawing in livelier sorts. Across from them was a wider table. There were at least 5 women in the group, the counting of them all made difficult by an excess of glitter, smoke, and bouncing headdresses. At the center of it all was a man, a long scar cut along one half of his face. At his ear was the most striking of the ladies. She was dressed entirely in black, her dress tight and unaware that embracing curves wasn't in fashion. There was a dragon spirit to her, bust causing pressure on her dress's neckline. But like Juliet, she didn't seem happy to be here. She blew a lungful of smoke on the man before turning sharp on her heel. "I really can go on forever." Dawn started laughing. "Good old days and whatnot. What about you, Dolly? Your mother said you started a degree? Where at?" She shrugged. taking up her glass of sparkling water. "Do you think that man's ever killed someone?" She motioned to the table behind Dawn. Her date craned his neck. As he looked through the glamorous company, he froze. The next moment he scrambled, readjusting in his seat so he was turned entirely away. "Oh, good goddess," he muttered. "What, am I right?" As Dawn sank in his spot, Juliet stretched her neck for better viewing. To quote her mother, Juliet was the type of girl who'd be best known for her missing persons picture. With a pretty nose that was always in someone's business, she was bound to make the morning paper. "Jules, don't," Dawn hissed. "If you tell me something interesting, I'll stop gawking." Dawn's brows knitted, face looking queasy. "That's Whiteheart. Not someone you want to mess with. Let's leave it at that." "I'm taking that as he has killed people." Her date grimaced. "Looking to party with a murderer or something?" She shrugged. "When my mother said we'd be on a date, I at least assumed I'd see my first speakeasy. Word on the street is you're into that sort of thing." "I didn't think you'd be the type to—" "I'm not," Juliet cut him short. "But if I'm stuck on a date, I may as well be somewhere interesting." Dawn raised a brow. "Stuck on a date?" "Look, it's not you, but I've never been on a date I enjoyed." Her gaze drifted to the girls at the next table. They were hanging off every word of that Whiteheart, giggling and bouncing. She couldn't fathom the sort of fun they were having. "It's probably the type Mother sends my way," she huffed, managing to pull her eyes from the scene. "The men, yourself included, don't jive with my ideas for myself." "And who would jive?" She shrugged. "I'm not sure. I want to keep up my business, you know? I don't want to be a goose on a nest while my gander's off gandering." "The only goose I'd gander is the one I got back home." "Donnie," she scolded, "I'm not a goose. That's the point of this. If I was to ever settle on a man, he'd be the goose." "I mean, fine and dandy, but given the circumstances—" "What circumstances?" "That you don't exactly got a business." Juliet scowled. "I beg your pardon? I manage the apartments that Father is renting out. It's not exactly an empire, but it's an honest start." Dawn grit his teeth, inhaling sharply through the gaps. "Not knocking it, but I might have heard some things." "Like what?" "That your mother and father are, they're pulling the plug on that." "Pulling the... what?"
"Listen, I wasn't supposed to tell you this, but your father is kicking you out of the apartment on King. The building you're managing on Lenora is getting knocked in shortly after you move back to the estate."
Juliet couldn't find it in her to shut her mouth. She felt dizzy, the waitstaff swirling by her to set down the main course. "They can't just do that. Why? Did they tell you?"
"Look, you know a few things about me. I know a few things about you. But from what I've gleaned, there was an issue involving a date, an ear, and a sprout."
Her eyes widened, soul rising up out of her body. "My mother knows about the incident?"
"Yes."
"Oh, good goddess of earth, how? What does she know?"
"About as much as I do, which isn't a lot. What happened? I figure it's a bit of an over-exaggeration. You look fine to me."
He stretched his neck slightly, as if trying to get a better peek at her ears. She fidgeted under the inspection, pulling her locks over them as she thought. Where could she start? The incident with her last date was a culmination of many things. It all began 3 years earlier, when she convinced her father into buying that property in the capital, the old apartment on Lenora Road, something cheap to start with. She'd interviewed a dozen hopeful tenants before she met her. Miss Deadwood was exactly the wrong type of person. She came to her interview dressed like a third-rate rum runner in a poorly fitted suit. She had no references, and even less to say for herself. Hypnotic images passed through her irises. Blackened feathers, death's veil, the decay of the forest. Then why did Juliet say yes? Surprisingly, it came back to ears. pointed ears.
Jules? Dawn prodded her from her thoughts.
All right. How much do you know about the apartment on Lenora?
Dawn shrugged. I stopped by to see if I could get to the root of the issue, and boy, did I get to the roots. Tons of roots. The building's a complete waste of time, like something dragged it out of the forest. Complete money pit. I can see why your father wants it gone.
Juliet felt a heat of anger. It was lovely when I got it, a little run down, but I put so much work into making it gleam. Once I have a talk with my father, I'm sure I'll spruce it up again.
Pretty sure it's got a spruce. Big one, too. Right down the middle of it.
Juliet huffed, not looking for your opinions on the matter.
What about questions? Like, if it didn't look like that before, what happened?
Incident or building? Juliet took up her knife and fork, slicing into her cut of venison.
Both.
Juliet considered it as she cut into the seared meat. She'd been crawling in the ceiling when it happened. The years passed, and the roots had taken hold of the building, crumbling its foundation, becoming it. At the same time, intrigue dug its thorny barbs in Juliet, permeating deep, right down to her dreams. Awake or sleeping, she found herself at the building, prying for information. But the mental thorns weren't the only worry. She often found seeds with hooked ends, fluffs for floating away, and other means of transportation. Often they came home with her in the folds of her dress. She spent long nights pulling them out, and had thought little of it, too excited by what she'd overheard from her tenant. The incident was during a date with a forgettable fella, she began. I'd been spending time cleaning the lower units, and leading up to the date, I'd been suffering an awful infection. I'm trying to nurse it on my own, because I know if I admit defeat, my mother is going to hear about it. I digress. The point is, I couldn't hear out of my ear for at least a week. And when it comes to the date, I'm thankful for the deafness, because this fella is prattling on and on and on, and I have the clever idea of offering up my bad ear for listening. He stops talking. At this point, he's not stopped talking the entire meal. I'm a bit flummoxed. He's staring at me. I go to fidget with my hair, and that's when I touch the leaf. Juliet uncovered her ear for Dawn, revealing its inner workings. She could still feel the pressure inside it. Whenever she powdered her face, she trimmed it all back. Dawn leaned forward, slack-jawed.
And you haven't had it looked at?
She shook her head. Don't get me wrong. I'm not without nightmares over it. I don't know what a doctor will do about it either. She leaned in close, whispering the rest of her sentence. I think it's magic.
Magic.
She nodded. Same with the building, Donnie. There's nothing else it could be. You wouldn't believe it, but my tenant, she's an elf. Dawn paused.
Elf.
Yes.
Dolly, elves haven't walked the earth in centuries.
You think I'm stupid? I know that. But who do you think did all this? A smile tugged at her mouth. Ever since she moved in, you wouldn't believe what I've accidentally caught on the phone line. She's the last elf in the world. Juliet's heart fluttered just thinking about it, but a knot formed equally fast in her stomach. I didn't think they could do magic either, but here we are.
I'd have to check on that.
Dawn met her grin.
So, you're into immortals and murder, huh?
She shrugged. I don't know if it's what I look for in a date, but it's a more interesting topic compared to college.
Not to brag, but I know plenty of immortals, Dawn boasted. If you're looking for something to do after dinner, I know a happening spot. Maybe one of them will know enough about your ear issue.
I'd have to think on it, Juliet shrugged. Nothing ruined excitement for a topic quite like a man boasting of his accomplishments with said topic.
I know deep down you're worried sick about that sprout. I can see it. I know a spirit, a dragon, a couple of exiled angels.
If I'm not interested in dating an immortal, why would I be interested in someone that mulls about near them? I can handle myself.
Oh, come on. What are you looking for in a fella?
I told you. A goose to my gander.
She pressed her fingertips to the table.
Nothing in the world terrifies me more than playing second fiddle to some Mr. Business. I'm the only heir my parents have to speak of. That's why Mother is so keen on setting me up. But I don't want to be the dead end of the family tree, nor do I want to pump out a baby for whoever Mother deems worthy.
Then what do you want?
Something. Anything. I'd take a plant in my ear over marriage any day.
Don leaned back in his spot. If you say so. I'd personally put my safety before any of that.
Am I talking to my mother?
Hey, don't take it out on me. He raised his arms defensively. You're going about it in a dangerous way. If you want an in with immortals, so be it. But what have you done so far? Ruin a building and wreck your ear?
She narrowed her eyes, staring past his untouched meal.
Maybe that thing's gone and rooted in your brain.
At least I have a brain.
At least I have an apartment.
What?
Dawn shrugged. Your mother's plan was to surprise you, but the movers are packing your apartment as we speak.
They're what?
She stood from her seat.
Running distraction for their plans? You dirty little louse.
It's happening one way or another. I'm not any part of it, okay?
He tucked in, beginning at his meat.
I'm here to expand your options. You could move back to your estate, or, well, like I said, I've got friends I'm meeting with tonight.
She threw her napkin onto the plate. I'm not interested in any of these friends of yours, and I'm not moving anywhere.